Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Fireside Chat. This is our Fireside Chat 23. And if you are new to the channel, it's important for you to understand that those are very informal chats. Normally, like Mash and I, Jose, we like to have a chat about different things, and we decided to start recording those things. And so there is not a lot of a big script. We just agree on the topic, like just a few minutes before we actually press the rec button. And also, if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. If you like those chats, or if you're new to the channel, subscribe to the channel so that you are notified when we have new videos. So for this Fireside Chat, we decided to talk about a topic that comes up all the time in all our projects, and it's about estimation, right? So should we estimate? Should we not estimate? And I would love to know from you guys, like, what is your view on estimation? Should we estimate? Should we not? What do we do? Is it a necessary evil, or what are your thoughts about estimation in general?
Jose.
Okay. So I'll break the ice. I think it comes up often because estimations tend to be the way that people answer certain specific questions about a project. For instance, when am I going to have this, right? Or how much of it I'm going to have by this date? Or how much is it going to cost me? No? And all of those are very valid questions, especially if you're paying for something, right? So you want the people who are going to be building the thing to kind of give you some sense of an answer. No, it's like if you go to you hire someone to do work in your house, you want to know, this renovation, how long is it going to take? It's a normal thing to ask, right? It may take longer, it may take less time. Usually it takes longer, it doesn't take less time, but it is there, right? It is a fundamental problem, no, of writing software or delivering software. And I feel that is why it comes up so often. And I feel like the reason why people don't like it so much, to the point of things like no estimates and so on, is that it's usually done very ineffectively, and inefficient as well, right? Like you're doing something that in the end won't give you the results or the what you're looking for, but you're spending a lot of time on it. Therefore, it's kind of waste, right? And if it's waste, then why are we doing it? No, so it brings to question that. So that's the general.
There is another element to it, actually, is that estimates can be used to put pressure on development teams, and it isn't the right way of you shouldn't, the development teams or people who are building the software, they shouldn't feel pressure in that kind of way. Of course, there's internal motivators to get the thing out and get the thing in with good quality and all those kind of things, but estimate is a stick as well, or it can be a stick to beat development teams with.
So, but before we go into the more of the, let's say, issues, it was not clear to me from both of your answers, do you think that estimate is an important thing in a project? Yes or no? For example, do you say, like, for example, you are managing, all of us, we manage teams, we manage lots of projects, and should we have estimates or not in the projects?
Okay. So just to qualify a bit more the question, I feel answering those questions is a very important thing in a project. Yeah. So answering those questions of when is this going to be finished, so that I can make decisions based on that kind of supposition, is very important. Answering the question of how much is this going to cost, or what can I get for this amount of money, is a very important. question to answer. So yes, answering those questions is now how you go about answering those, how faithful you are to that, like what kind of effort you put into it, and so on and so forth. That's a very different story.
I'm gonna play devil's advocate, but by the way, my answer is also that estimates is not intrinsically a bad thing to do, or the exercise of estimating is not intrinsically a bad thing to do. But I'm gonna play devil's advocate here, answering the question once something is gonna finish. Software projects are notoriously difficult to estimate. So if the stage that we're at means that we're going to give you a wrong answer, is it important to have the wrong answer in this case? Because I'm not going to be able to tell you when it's finished because I don't know.
But you're always acting on imperfect information, and whatever, you still need to make decisions on that. So maybe your estimation is not as far away from what it is, and then it turns out that I can make a good decision based on that imperfect information. Maybe it is way off, and then it may turn out that I'm making a bad decision, but I'm not going to know either way until we get there.
But
right?
So I'm playing devil's advocate still, right? Imperfect actually, when you don't know and when it's very difficult to know, I would argue that saying I don't know is better information than saying it's gonna take this long.
Yes and no, because if you
It
this really depends on no, exactly. It depends on what kind of
Right.
business you're in and so on, right? Like let's say you're working on a product company, you still want budgets and you still want to understand what the return on investment on the things that you're doing is, right? But for a company like ours, you have clients and you need to budget and you need to, and not always you can just say, I don't know, let's start and let's see where this leads us, right? It doesn't work like that all the time.
But what you
You
can say
can't
is
make it.
Sorry, if you're gonna budget, you can say, well, tell me what the budget is gonna be. We're gonna work really hard. You can plan, you can allocate budget, and we're gonna work for the next year, and we're gonna start doing stuff. Again, I'm playing devil's advocate.
Just to make it very clear. Let's make it very clear.
Yeah, we can start doing stuff. We'll prioritize the most important thing. We'll start doing it. You have your answer. It's gonna be a team of 6. This is our salary. We're gonna be doing this for at least a year. Okay. Budget that, and then let's get started.
I applied that to reform at your place, right? I'm the builder, right? It's like, okay, so what's your budget? Yeah, what's your budget? Is it 3,000, 10,000, 100,000? Okay, so that budget, with that budget, I can have 10 people here.
I have a problem
working
with
at your
metaphor. I have a problem with this metaphor. Like often this comes through, right? The problem I have is that software development is usually a continuous activity and it's a complex activity. Versus if I want my bathroom done, it's a finite activity. It will be done. Software normally never gets finished. You're constantly working on it because it is driving your business, and your business evolves and the software keeps evolving and your priorities keep changing and all those kind of things. I don't turn around to my bathroom guy and say, you know what, you budgeted this, but I want now that wall removed going over there, and I want this over there. I want this much bigger bathroom, and I want another building to come by the side of it, and it needs to be a steam bath and all. I don't keep changing my requirements like that. It is a very well-defined and not an evolutionary process, and quite it works on the basis of these things are very repeatable. Software development is not a repeatable activity. It's always unique.
Yeah. I'm somewhere in the middle. I know that you are playing devil's advocate, Mesh, and I appreciate that. I have quite a few perspectives on this. I had the perspective of the developer. That was the one that I had for most of my career, right? And this is going back to what you were saying, Mash, I was being asked to provide estimates on a lot of uncertainty, on things that I had no clue how long it would take, and mainly when you are at the beginning of a project. So it's very difficult for you to be very precise in what you need to do because you don't know, right? Or you are adopting new technologies and so on and so forth. There's a lot of uncertainty. We can talk about uncertainties in a bit. So that is that perspective of the person providing the estimate when given the amount of uncertainty. So from that perspective, I have a problem with estimates. Of course I do. But then there is the other perspective that they took me much longer to understand is who is the estimate is for, and most importantly, not only who is for, why do they need that information? And this is, for me, is the key thing, and that goes back to Jose's point. Because like before I give them just random numbers and maybe do more harm than good, it will be good to understand why do they want that information, right? And a totally valid information is they say, oh, look, we don't have unlimited budget in here. There is a core, although it will be a continuous, probably that software will continue to evolve, but there is a very specific case set of features or set of behaviors that they want to get out. And they might even need to validate if they should even entertain that idea. For example, it's not only when it's going to be finished, like, can we even afford just to even get started? So they need a ballpark, as in any other project that if we were paying for, we would need, like, can I afford this? Right. And so that information is important for people to plan their financial year, to plan the amount of budget, to plan the time and number of people involved, because the estimate is not only about the money and time, but it's also the amount of people involved in that project. Because you can the time and money will be variables, but the number of people involved will also contribute to those variables, right? So to the value of those variables. So all of that is all about planning. And then once we understand what they need to plan, we can calibrate the estimate accordingly. And then there is the perspective of me as an individual, as well as paying for everything I pay. I know that you don't buy the very much the example mesh, because we normally talk
metaphor,
the metaphor, because we normally are talking about some things that are far more well defined. But like, even for projects, it's like, well, we want to do all of that, but as soon as you start doing something in your house, there's always, oh, as you are doing that, can you also do that and that and that? But again, I don't ask for a very specific, because this is our thing, like, given the kind of question you have in mind, you have a different answer. You calibrate the estimate. I don't go to the builders. I've done a lot of changes in my house over time, and I don't go down to the detail. But I can say, can you give me a ballpark of time and money? Because then I can see, first of all, can I afford even to start this project? And I understand in my head that the amount of disruption that I'm going to have for a period of time. So for me, understanding that makes sense. And then all the estimates can be calibrated to answer those questions.
Yeah, time is actually a very important thing, because in some cases the deadline is real.
Mm-hmm.
And estimates would allow you to understand the amount of effort that you need to put in something in a finite time. So, like, one of the things we worked at Sandro was like, some legislation had to come in we had a year, and you had to go live with certain complying to certain legislation, because that legislation came online that particular date, right? So that there is a minimum that needs to be done for the business to not then end up in court, right? So that, and then based on that, you can then see, well, what amount of effort and how do I improve my chances of hitting that deadline with the minimum that is needed, right? So that, I think that's an important part where estimates do play a very big role. Yes, and it is, the other part is that sometimes when the reason I was kind of just arguing about this kind of playing devil's advocate is that sometimes when we talk about estimate, and I chose my words very carefully, said I like estimation. And there are two reasons behind it. One is that actually, if we are continuously estimating, and we know that the fidelity of our estimates are much more vague or ill-defined in the beginning, and as we continue and progress and so on, they get better and better defined, and that again allows people to plan better because we can provide more accurate answers, right? That's one thing. The other thing about estimates is, and the reason I like estimation, is that it allows you to look at things holistically and at the detail level at the same time. And that analysis that the team goes through together is invaluable because the amount of insights that it delivers, because what you are doing is you're looking at the big picture and you're zooming in and you're going back up and you're zooming in. And you don't do that in an incremental thing. You don't do that. I mean, you can force yourself to do that, but then you're kind of, you have to be very disciplined about it. Normally you wouldn't if you're just doing the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. But if you have this cadence of like, okay, I'm going to look at the whole thing. Can I, how, and then I'm going to calibrate it with the previous time I looked at the whole thing. You go into these details, you do this exercise, and this actually aids problem or comprehension, the things that you are trying, and the solution design and its comprehension. And I think this is invaluable. And this is the kind of stuff that people don't talk about when they talk about estimates, is that the actual exercise in itself is encouraging you to do much deeper problem analysis and solution design. And that's a good thing. You're trying to come up with uncertainties, risks, assumptions, all these things early, so that you can do something about those moving forward, rather than kind of hit a brick wall blindly because you didn't think much about it.
Yeah, it's a bit like that phrase. What is it? Plans are useless. Planning is essential. No, or something along those lines. No, like the estimate itself, or the, if you come up with a number, that's not that great on its own. It's all the process that you went through in order to get there. And you also mentioned something around being accurate. As you're moving forward, you're being more accurate. And one thing that usually comes up is accuracy and precision. Like, because giving a number, like we're going to be done, by this date, that's very, very precise, but it may not be. It may not be right. So therefore, it's not accurate. So a lot of people think of estimations as in points, point estimation, and not so much in ranges. And this is where we are moving, right? Like we're talking a bit about uncertainty and managing that uncertainty. We know that we're going to be moving along some line, based on our guess work, our best guess and our worst guess and our average guess. Now, if
the cone of uncertainty,
exactly, the kind of uncertainty, right? So, but we usually tend to talk, well, when is it going to be done, and you give it a date. No? And the problem is that if you are not precise enough, so the trick here is, how do you get precise enough and accurate so that people can make decisions based on that? So that people can plan, I'm going to have this disruption for this amount of time, or I'm going to have to invest this time, or put this effort into for this period of time. And that's tricky, right? Like that, achieving that balance. If you go too imprecise, like when is it going to be between 1st of January this year and 31st of January next year, I can't really do much with that. No, like from a planning perspective, from organizing and sequencing and all these things, or even managing uncertainty, like that's not very helpful. and that varies from project to project, and it varies on, based on the uncertainty that you have in the project itself.
Yeah, and this is why I was saying that is important to understand what we need the estimates for, right? So because like I always feel that there is a lot of diminishing returns in terms of getting too fine-grained on the estimates, because normally the person that is asking for the estimate, again, we just need to understand who is asking, what do they need that information for, right? So if they are asking for a planning purpose, and planning also has different levels of planning, right? So for example, can we even afford to get started? Right, so they might already have a budget in mind, they might have already an idea in mind, and they say, look, let's see how long roughly this is going to take, and then the range is normally the right thing to do, and then you need to calibrate the unit that you use in your estimate. So for example, I normally don't like anything below weeks. I normally find that for planning perspective, from a organizational planning, is already law of diminishing returns. Like, so getting to the number of days or hours, that is, but for example, normally at the organizational planning, month would be enough. Maybe 2 weeks, or like if you prefer sprints, right? So blocks of 2 weeks or blocks of months. Then you can have a range on a month. It's just calibrating the range, the unit, sorry. Of course, if the range is too big, as you said, Jose, it might take like from 1 year to 2 years. That's significantly quite a big range, right? So then we need to see, like, is this enough for them to plan? Are they planning like the next 5 years? If they're planning the next 5 years, that might be enough. If they're planning what they're going to do in the next 12 months, that is certainly not good enough. So then understanding at which level they are planning, then you can calibrate the units. And of course, that the smaller the unit, the more you need to deal with uncertainty. And then there are many different ways for you to deal with uncertainty as well. This is just one kind of estimate. That is the estimate about planning. But there is a different type that Mesh mentioned when you are working against dates. And Mesh gave the example of the regulatory dates that you have. If I'm not wrong, Mesh, you even spent like your New Year's Eve in the office, right?
Yeah.
So Mesh celebrated, everyone celebrating the New Year, and Mesh was working that night, right? So, but for example, some companies have not only the regulatory ones, but there are.
One thing is, we should specify that this did not happen when you were at
It was before Codurance. It was before Codurance, just to be very clear.
Because you were going to flip out.
No, it was before Codurance.
Yeah, well, at Codurance it could happen, but I'd be very unhappy. But we're always working, so it does happen. It's just different kind of work, I think. Yeah.
But then there are, for example, a different type of estimates for seasonal business. Like, for example, there is Christmas or Easter or whatever else, or Black Friday. And then we are 6 months away from it. And then the business says, hey, we have a lot of those features that would be great to get out for Christmas. And if we miss Christmas, then we need to wait for 12 months, right? So then you can work backwards. Okay, from that date, from now to that date, what is possible to achieve? And most of the time, the time is a bigger factor in the estimate than the actual money itself. Money is always a consequence, right? Money they play with normally, right? But the time is quite often a more important factor. But those are the different types. Like, are you just planning, or you are working backwards from a date?
You know, you're touching on another point, which is cost of delay, which is one of the things that are very important when making this type of decision. And you took the example of Christmas, right? So if Christmas, I don't know, is on the 25th or whatever, right? Normally you can find that people will buy sort of like in a distribution around that date, right? Like it basically, you may have a lot of people buying stuff, you know, on that day, no, but after that it will again go down and so on.
Yeah.
So the later you start something, for instance, or the later you, let's say, have that release of the new Christmas deals or whatever, that amount of people that are affected, or potential revenue that you can create from that is less the closer you get to that day. So all of those things you need to take into consideration when thinking whether you want to, start now or wait, or and get an idea of when things are going to be done. And for me, it all goes back to the iron triangle of project management, right? The quality in the center, right? And then you have the functionality, no, the money and the time,
And time.
right?
Scope,
And you
time,
need
money,
to
yeah.
and you need to scope, is the scope, time, and money, so you need to play with those, right? And what happens a lot of the times when people, and this goes back to close budget projects versus like all of these things that we're talking about. When people usually approach this, is they want certain features by certain date on this price. You kind of fix everything in, and then the only way that people can manage to get there, if they get there, is to drop quality, right? The fourth variable in there. Now, if you want to work with those constraints, you can, but then you need to leave at least one of them free. Quality is not negotiable for us.
You need
Well,
to pick
quality,
two, right?
because quality at some point will impact time and money and everything
Exactly.
else, and so you kind of just you kind of borrowing from one of those things, not moving it but borrowing from it.
Exactly. So then you can either say, okay, I want all of these features by this date, and then money is something that you can play with. So maybe you'll have a bigger team to work on this and so on. Or you can say, this is the team that I have, and I need to release by this date. And then you want to answer the question of, what are the features that I'm gonna have, that I'm gonna have by that date. Or you have this team and this amount of features. When is it going to be done, right? And you can, but you always need to fix two and then try to figure out what the other one is. The problem is when you try to fix everything in place.
No, you cannot fix the three. So, for example, one thing that people say a lot and say, if you need to provide estimates, then you are not agile. So is estimate against agile? Or you can have estimate, but it's still working in agile fashion. What is there a conflict between the two, in your opinion?
No, I think the way I see it is that it's the same argument people have about upfront design is not agile, right? It's and the in both cases actually, you talk about extreme. You can be agile or not agile with or without estimates. I don't think they and the same thing is about this design, right? And of course you can go to the real extremes. In just like with design, you can go with the two real extremes with estimates as well. You can either not do them at all, and then of course but not actually replace it with any other discipline, right? And that's an extreme. Or you can just do too much of it to the point where you're introducing a lot of wasted effort, but also you're causing dysfunction. You can, with estimates, create a lot of dysfunction within the teams, because if the estimates are being used to put pressure on the teams in a way to kind of beat teams up, to create even division within teams, because the favorite person is saying, oh, it'll take less time, and the the not favorite is saying, no, like it's not, so there's politics, and all sorts of dysfunction can germinate because you're not doing it well. So I personally don't, to answer your question, is I don't think doing estimate, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be agile, right? Or if your hashtag no estimates does not mean that you are agile.
Okay. we can get to that.
I would just like, as you were speaking, I was thinking about it. I would go further to say that actually, in order for you to be agile, you need estimates.
Oh,
and
wow.
I'll tell you, I'll tell you why. So think about.
Leave it in the comments. Leave the.
Of course, you don't need, but I think you'll be more agile if you have estimates. And let me try to explain
We
where
should
I'm
make
coming
that
from.
the title of this fireside chat. By the way, we'll get lots of
Estimations
views.
make you agile, right? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
when you really distort completely what was said, right? So what I was thinking, like, this is the perspective that I'm taking here. Yeah. So imagine that being agile for me, like I always say, like, is all about short feedback loops. So you shorten your feedback loop and then you inspect and adapt. That's for me is what agile means. Yeah. So shorten all my feedback loop. Given the new information, I adjust what needs to be done. That's how I understand agile. So let's say that we made a decision. For example, we had to know if this project is a go or not, given what we can allocate for this project, or we are working against a date, right? Either one would work. So one, we will hit the date. The other one, we will not have more money to continue. Yeah. So both of them, we would need to end. So you have an initial estimate to know what is possible to be done with that amount of money or by that date. Yeah. As we start, we need to keep re-estimating that. So what I'm not saying is that the original estimate that was done at the very beginning, at the point that you know the least, should remain throughout. But as we did our initial estimate so that we decide if it's a go or not, and then as we iterate, we should have checkpoints as we were doing in some of our projects now, that, for example, we would plan for 6 months. And then 6 to 7 months, it varies. Like, I can talk more about our phases and how we do certain projects. But so we have an initial plan for the phase. Yeah, so that would be a few months' time, between 6 or 9 months. But as we start, we are taking stock every month. Okay, now that we went for 2 sprints, like 2-week sprints, we will re-estimate the entire thing. Because at that point, once we do that first re-estimation, we know a little bit more than we knew 1 month ago. And then we can now change course. So if we feel that after a month, we might not hit the date, okay, what is possible to do by that date? So if that original plan is not going to work, what can we do instead? Or if the money is going to run out by a certain point, okay, how can we trim the fat? So then we work a little bit more and we re-estimate everything again. What I'm trying to say is that estimates become a reliable source of information so that you can adjust the course. This is where I was coming from.
So I think that, this is basically very much aligned with the point I made, that estimation in itself is quite a valuable activity because it allows you to look at the holistic and the detail and do problem analysis, and of course that knowledge would also help you with prioritization as well. I wouldn't go as far as saying that is the only thing you can do. You can do problem analysis differently. You can also, in order to achieve that similar kind of thing, you don't have to estimate the whole thing. You can actually look at the next few things and which one to choose for the next month. You don't need to, because if you're trying to, I totally understand how you basically, if let's say your budget runs out in 2 months time, then yes, of course you need to understand what is achievable and even look at other things that you may bring in instead of what's already there, but also that is further kind of colored by your business priorities and all that kind of stuff as well. So you can do smaller estimates. You don't have to do the big estimate, right? So yeah, I think whether that kind of helps you with being agile, I think problem analysis does, but not like full blown estimates. You can still achieve what you're achieving with kind of estimates that take you to that horizon. And looking at business priorities, it might be that you don't actually have a choice, and these are the priorities from a business.
Just to be clear, Mash, like in terms of when I say we re-estimate everything, the unit is important in this conversation, because when you say a full-blown analysis estimate, I'm not talking about working in hours. The units that we choose are number of sprints. So, for example, the units that we were doing in some of the projects, we were creating phases that would be from 9. The size of the phase would vary. We had 2 different criteria to define a phase. We could define by the amount of scope. So what would be like some cohesive scope that would make a full phase? But there is an element of time as well. We didn't want the cohesive scope of the cohesive set of scope to be like 2 years long. So normally the guideline would be like, what if our phases would always be around 6 months? Sometimes it's 7, sometimes it's 5. It varies around that. So then but the estimate at that level becomes number of sprints that are 2 weeks. So when for example, after a month, what is left to be done is 5 months, let's say, which is 10 sprints. So the estimates are calibrated at an epic level, and the units are sprints. So given the number of epics and the size of them and complex and stuff, this is roughly how many sprints we have left. And that would fit or not fit the next 5 months, let's say. So it is a very, very high level. So it doesn't take like in an hour and a half, we can re-estimate everything, because the level that we are doing that. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So this is the thing. Like, there are many ways in which you could sort of answer those questions. Like the traditional waterfall approach, where you go and do a task breakdown, and then dependencies, and then you build your your Gantt diagram, and you have your critical path and all that stuff, right? Usually goes to the level of detail of hours. How many hours are you going to spend doing this thing, and can you parallelize or not, and so on. Now, we're really bad at this kind of stuff, because there are a few things that time is kind of like an abstract concept. So saying something's gonna take 1 hour or 3, or no, if it's not something that we've done many times, so therefore we have empirical experience to kind of past experience derive future experience, then it's going to be really hard to be accurate at that point. And we tend to go over a lot of the time. Therefore, people tend to add buffers. But then once you add buffers, then people at the same time have this cognitive kind of bias thing, where the student syndrome, right? Like if I have 2 days to do this, then I'm going to spend 1 day doing X, Y, and then the other day I'm going to start it, and then at the third day it's kind of late, because it turns out that I really needed the 3 days from the beginning. So now I'm like at the end, now I need to continue adding. And then you start all of these things where you're trying to manage, time from one task and putting it into another one, and so on, and trying to juggle things around to make things fit on with your estimation or with your plan. That's not a great way of doing that. When you're going for a project, let's say 6 months, whatever, like there's a few things that you can do, and usually it's something around the lines of estimate size, derive the duration, right? And estimate the size of the whole thing, do a test, and out of that test, whichever method you're using for it, then you derive the duration of the whole thing, right? So let's say the typical example is, how long is it going to take you to read all of the foundation books or all of the Harry Potter books? There's 7 books. Every book is roughly 300 pages. That gives you a total of, that's the whole thing. And you can do that in many different ways. No? And then you go and say, okay, maybe I can read about 60 pages in X amount of time. And then you go and say, okay, so how much would that be? and then you have the total time that it will take you to do this thing. And then of course you can put buffers. I'm not going to read continuously, I'm going to stop, and then you add the in between times, etc. But it usually is you take the size of the whole thing, and then somehow you estimate how long it will take, a little bit of that, and then you try to derive from that the time that the whole thing will take. Yeah. Now there are many ways in which you can try to do that experiment. One is, we've done this in the past. It was roughly this price, this size. You can do that based on past experience. Another example is, we do 1-2 sprints, and then based on that, we understand what kind of speed we have. What ratio we are able to actually do the work, and then based on that, we try to derive the duration. Another example is you get a group of people in the room, ask them to simulate how they will build this thing. As in, I'm guessing that you have like a backlog or series of stories. No, like we will build this first, and then this, and this won't fit anymore. It's already 2 sprints. Okay, so then next, and so on. Another way would be using something called Monte Carlo simulation. So basically, you do a distribution of what are the most probable outcomes, and then based on that, you can figure out what that could look like. Based on sampling. There are plenty of ways that you can do it. And the whole idea of that will give you usually a range, and you work within that range, and you can then start managing the risk. If you're going below what you thought it would be, if you're going above, and see what it is that you want to do. You can reprioritize things in the backlog and so on and so forth. But the basic idea is that one, right? It's like, if you cannot tell the size of the thing, it's very hard to actually give an estimate in time.
Yeah,
but that is the sorry, go on.
No, go on.
No, I was going to say that is the most well, actually, once you know the size of the thing, is very important. It's easier to work out the extrapolate to the plan, to the time. That's not the difficult part. I think the size is the difficult part, right? And the size, you can work out the size in many different ways. As you said, unfortunately, the Harry Potter book, not every story is the same size. It's not the same font and not the same size written and all the rest, and you'll have this amazing fluctuation that happens when we're creating features. But not only about that, it's also about the kind of the state of the team at that particular time. People leave, people fall ill, people have problems with each other, and all the above, right? And so all these things matter, and they play a part into this. So estimation is not an exact science. And I think if you're talking about points or you're talking about ranges, estimation with points with buffers is a range, right? But I think it's important that everybody is well educated with what estimates are. They are a guess, right? And a guess has a probability of coming close to reality or being very far away from reality, and it is not the fault of the people guessing. Then you start going into this domain of educated guesses. Yeah, but educated guess is basing something in the future on previous experience. Your probability may increase on getting the thing right, but there is always a probability that you won't get it right? And I think these things are important to understand, and especially people who are consuming estimates, the team itself, but also all the other stakeholders, and they need to create the right relationship with estimates, right? I think this is the important point.
There is one thing that I think that teams can do far more to remove uncertainty, because this is all about uncertainty. If you don't know the size of something, then we have to guess. So the less information, the less we know about something, the more wild our guess will be.
Yeah, but this is there's one point here, Sandro, which is what teams usually get asked to give is time and not the amount of work. And this is, by the way, a fundamental thing in this approach of the size. We are really bad at saying it in time, but we can compare things a lot better. Like we know if this thing is bigger than this other thing, roughly, that we can tell, or if it's smaller. And this is what
But
that
it's not
method
enough.
kind of. No, it's never enough. It's not going to be exact and accurate to that level, right?
Yeah.
But it's easier to tell how much work something roughly is, how much I have to do, than it is to tell how long it will take me. Because another problem with this is that, as Mash was saying, people come and go from the project. If I do it and I know a lot about this particular thing, I may do it faster, even twice or three times as faster than maybe you, right? So it then becomes a matter of who is doing what, instead of a general idea of what overall it should go, independently of who is doing it. And all of these things are important there. This is why, when you're talking about points, or you're talking about estimating stories and so on, what you're talking about is really how much work do you need to do in order to complete. Is this bigger than this other thing? And not exactly if it's 3 hours or whatever. Like, then once you have the total size of the thing, then you can go and say, okay, in total, how much do we feel it's going to take? And that's an important distinction. Eh?
But this is what I was trying to say before. There are different stages that you do estimates, right? When you are starting something from scratch, you don't have a lot of things to compare to. So you are really a bit blind. And then you do this very simplistic ways of doing things. You say, like, this seems to be 3 times bigger than the other one, or so you can use size or complexity or whatever. So then you do those kind of things, and then you just like try to calculate the numbers and say, like, given like the relative size of those things, because we don't know much about it. We can take the one that seems to be smaller, one that seems to be big, someone in the middle, and then given those 3 points, I can kind of extrapolate the rest. But this is the kind of thing that you do in the very early on in the project, just to give a rough idea. We are talking about weeks, months, years, like so. But then this is where you start from, but this is not where you stop. This is what I was trying to say. So this is okay at that level when we are starting from scratch. As you moved 1 month in, let's say, I now know a little bit more, not for everything, but one thing that we start doing is, even this first month, we would not just dive into our first sprint either. So what we would do, even to get this initial, to remove some of this initial guesswork, we say, like, can we start with an inception for a project? And in this inception, there is an element. We start with this big analysis, but instead of just throw a number straight away, of course, sometimes you need to, because like if someone is buying the project or not, you need to throw a number and give them an estimate. If you can go past that, it's like, okay, it looks like this amount of time and with this amount of people would cost X. If the range is okay, is acceptable, that range, we don't stop there. Normally, what we would push for is an inception phase. Before our first iteration, okay, this is what we gave you for us to get started. Our inception phase, we normally start, what are the key of uncertainties in there? And we would take, in a project that, let's say, would last a year, as our original guess, spending 2, even to 4 weeks at the beginning to go a little bit deeper and refine those things is not a bad investment. So we start with this inception. This inception, what we'll do, we will take all the key points of uncertainty that we had, and we're going to have a lot of time-boxed exercise, or we call them spikes or whatever, yeah. Right? So we call them spikes and say, hey, those are the uncertainties. Okay, what don't we know? Or what are the things that we should know about that? And then we allocate the time box and say, we are going to work. So during our inception phase, we are going to work on the areas of uncertainty. And the outcome of the inception phase is a refined estimation and plan. Because at least at that time, now you have time to play with those things, if you need to integrate with another system. In that original estimation session, we probably don't have enough time to play with, to read the APIs and everything. But if you had a couple of days for a pair or for a person, just to, okay, I'm going to just focus for 2 days, 1 week, whatever, and see how that integration can be done. Out of those exercises during the inception phase, we can have a more refined idea of, well, we can remove some of the uncertainty that we had and be a little bit more precise. Would it solve all our problems? No, but we would have a better range than we had before. And then what we were trying to do is now, because we know now roughly the scope, right? Of course, the scope will vary. But then as we go in, after, let's say, 2 sprints or a month, we can say, okay, let's do another high level again, because there is another thing that quite often I see that is bad in the relative size that we did at the beginning. We compare complexity. Oh, this thing here seems to be 3 times bigger than this one, and so on and so forth, right? And then we just extrapolate the numbers. But what we don't take into account is that one feature will be built on top of each other. There will be something that is reused, some test suite that is already in there, some pipeline that is already in there, something that can be reused. And
actually the opposite also true, that, the larger the system, the next feature would be more difficult to add.
Depending on how you design and how they overlap, that is true as well.
Usually is the case, right?
And there is the variance of number of people changing as well, as you mentioned as well, Mesh. So, for example, I think that re-estimating every month or so at the high level. So, okay, now that we already, because one feature, like feature A, feature B is 3 times more complex than A. But if A is done and B can be built on top, complexity-wise, B is still 3 times more complex than A. But when we get to implement B, once A is already implemented, it might not take 3 times more. Right. It might take just a time and a half.
I understand that. However, there's a few things here. One is normally the shape that the speed at which things go through the project. Let's say the let's call it burn down rate or completion and so on. It follows like an S curve, right? Like at the beginning you're slower because you're still learning about the system. Then suddenly you catch speed, and then at some point it starts again slowing down. Okay, that is in general that's sort of like the shape that these things take. Now, when you're doing that and re-estimating things, you're kind of changing the scale as you're doing the project. So this is why I'm not in favor of doing something like that. I'm okay with estimating the new stuff that comes up with the new knowledge, and therefore giving it a size that is appropriate for it. Now, if I have to add a new feature, and now I know that this part is already in place, I'm not gonna estimate it at the same size as if nothing was built, right? So I will most likely that will have a smaller size. So anything that is coming in new, you're using that knowledge to put a size to it because you know more about the project. The rest of the things you're keeping the same, and you're keeping the same for a couple of reasons. One is that at any point you want to move things in the backlog, right? Like you want to be able to change the order in which you build things. So if you suddenly say that something is a 1, right, and then it needs to move, and it turns out that you consider that you would have XYZ built before, but it's no longer the case, then it's no longer a 1, it's now a 5 or whatever other size. So this is part of the thing. You want to have that flexibility. Therefore, I don't really care that much about that. I care about what speed we're burning that thing down. Because if one day we burn down 10 stories, 10 points, whatever metric you're using, and then the next day we do 20, that's great. At some point I'm going to trace a line, and I'm going to say, oh, we're on time, right? Like we're going to finish when we want to finish, and so on. So it's not really that important, the size of those things, as long as you're controlling both the ratio at which you're burning down and the ratio at which you're adding to the backlog, which is another thing. Like there's another curve, because if you continue adding stuff, No, because you find new information or new
but if you
features.
don't re-estimate the things that were there, how would you know? Because like again, like something that you have, like what you've done at the beginning of the project, 2 months in, some of those things now, because we already, this is why we are separating the complexity from time. We have a 2-pass estimate.
It will just go faster. It will just go faster. Instead, let's say you estimated something.
But then we need to know.
But you know, because suddenly
no,
you finished. You're picking up, and instead of doing 2-3 points, you're doing 10, 15. And when you do that calculation again, it's going to tell you that it's
Jose, but well, you know, every time you re-estimate, you can estimate the whole thing. I mean, that would, you know, I understand the problem you're presenting, which is that, you know, you go 20% through your backlog, you estimated the whole backlog, and you were estimating it in a particular sequence, so you're making it all independent of each other, right? But if you're making it from the very start, if you're making it all independent of each other, then you don't have a problem. You know, you can re-estimate things because they are independent of each other. If you as Sandro was saying, maybe you're looking at the backlog and you think, okay, if this is done, then this will be smaller and so on. From the start, you kind of weighting things according to the order. Then, of course, you need to, then the next time you come to estimate, you can't just move one story to the next. There is a time dependency between them. If you had done the original estimates that way, and then yes, in that case, you need to estimate the whole backlog again. But I think estimating the whole backlog, or at least your next horizon, where it up to where it matters, estimating it holistically is actually a good thing, because that's what I was talking about, the problem analysis.
Going down and
yes, looking at the whole thing again, looking at the things, but also using your prior knowledge, also understanding how
the current state of the system, state of the system, where we are now, and not where we were a few months before. This is what I'm saying.
But we're talking about different things here, because what I'm referring to in this case is, let's say we have a closed budget project, right? There's a set of features that we need to do, and based on that we give a budget, and now we're working towards a certain date, for instance, for completion, and then you can start working with the backlog, for instance, and negotiating the features or the scope, right? Now again, I'm not, can you do it? Yes, you can do it. You can, every time that you get new knowledge, you can re-estimate a thing. Is it effective from my point of view? Not really.
But okay, why do you say that it's not effective? Is it about time? Because, for example, if you say that it's going to take...
It's about the dedication, it's about the effort put into re-estimating something that was already done, for instance, that's waste. That's not something that I want to be doing.
No one is going to re-estimate what has been done. What has been done is done. It's just what is left to be done, right? And what if I said that we can do that in an hour and a half, once a month? And everything that we estimate is in sprint units, half sprints, 2 sprints, 1 sprint. So,
and you're review, like estimating a new thing and reviewing your existing estimates on something you analyze already. They're two different things.
And the only thing that we are doing is recalibrating that, because like when you did that like 3 months ago, not only your knowledge was less, but the system was in a different state. Now the system has progressed. More infrastructures in there. That feature can be much easier or even harder, depending on the ramifications. But if we are able to quickly, because like the argument will be removed if we can do that quickly, because I would agree with you. If the estimate takes 2 days to be done, then I would be a bit worried for the whole team. But what if, again, when would take that amount of time? When you have the law of diminishing return, and we are going to try to go to user story level and low level points and hours. But if you're talking about high level epics, just to see like for the next 6 months that we have ahead, or 5 months, or 3 months that we have ahead, we are just taking the core features and re-estimate at that level. Then I cannot see why would we not do that. See what I'm saying? Because the order also, like, then you can recalibrate given the current state of the system, the current knowledge of the people, given what are the core features that we want to tap in the next 3 months, we can be very smart in terms of the order as well, right? But then we reestimate every time that we make some significant progress, and I think that a month is a good amount of time.
The same scale, right? You're still using the same scale because this is
the scale will always be at. I normally like, for again, because those kind of estimates are for planning, right? So they're not about hours or days and stuff. This is not about points on a sprint. I couldn't care less. This is about business planning. What can we get done for the next 3 months because of the budget or because of a date or whatever? And that is at that level. And that is a core feature, because even some of those epics can also be dehydrated, or we can trim the fat of them as well, right?
So this is why I prefer. With the scope. Again, then you're working with the scope to meet that
at the high level. Of course, for me, as soon as you go low level, there is a law of diminishing return. Then that estimation is pointless. If we're gonna go 2 hours.
All right.
Right.
Yeah. There's a more empirical. Sorry.
Go for it.
No, there's a more empirical way of doing this thing, which is, the way that that Kanban, or people using Kanban, using cycle time and so on, and based on that, have your burn rate, on each of these things, and that's a bit more empirical in that sense. You're using, again, this is part of what I was referring to before, because what you are doing is you're tracking those, and you're using those to forecast where. But
this is a whole new conversation, and as usual, you just put it up right at the last minute. But
I usually
because actually, like you usually do. But actually, even with the Kanban style. In Kanban, the important thing is to reduce blockers, not to make lead times predictable. And to reduce the waste in making lead time predictable basically means that the items coming in, the stories coming in, are of similar size, right? And often people go for making lead times predictable at the when actually it's not related to the waste in your system. So I think in lean kind of ways, making lead time predictable, although everyone tries to do it, is not the best thing, because actually that is totally dependent on not the amount of waste and queues that sit in your system. It's actually dependent on the size of your item. And if you can make the size of your item
roughly the same
then you can. But that actually just shifts the problem of estimation down that way, because how do you make the size of your items the same? And then it's not. If you can make the size of your stories in your backlog exactly or very similar, then of course that's also helps with when you're not lean.
But then you're, I completely agree. But you're leaving out a couple of other things, like classes of service and that kind of stuff, which in Kanban in particular you can have. You don't treat all work the same. Yeah, and that is also part of the thing. But I agree with you. Like the whole point of that. The way that works is that you have a histogram then of all the lead times. You usually have a distribution with a really long tail for things that are outside of, and then you can use where most of the things are to give you the percentage of certainty based on what you have for that class of service or that type of work that you're using, right? So you can to some extent do that for things of different sizes.
But then you can do the same, right?
Stories of five have this distribution. Stories of have this distribution. So I know roughly where those stories would, and you can do that analysis per size of thing, and then use use Monte Carlo, for instance, to have the whole thing, simulated. To some extent, do the based on those values. just generate the most likely distribution for that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think what we need a part 2, because there are so much stuff that
We didn't get to know estimates. Oh, both. Well, more or less, we kind of.
And I also wanted to talk about, because you did talk about relative sizing, but also the kind of 3-point story estimate, which is based on effort, right? And it's not relative, but it has pros and cons of its own. So there's stuff that we haven't discussed that we
exactly. And I wanted to explore more about as the system evolves as well. So those original sizes, they also have different meanings as well. And because again, if you're just talking about complexity or complexity time, we were dividing the two. We were having a 2-pass estimate, one in complexity to compare relative size, and the other one is the actual time. And as the system moves, those things change as well.
And the role of assumptions and logging assumptions against your estimates.
Exactly. So there is there how to deal with uncertainty, maybe giving more details. So also why developers don't. So what is the problem when we give those numbers as well? Why developers don't want to give those numbers? What are the problems? Because one thing we are trying to help the business, right? So hey, we want you plan, we will help you. But there is a problem with that as well, right? So as we all know, so I think we will need, I believe, a part 2 for this one, because that is true.
And we will come prepared.
We'll come a little bit more prepared.
With slides.
Talk about yourself.
but even like giving more details about those different types of planning, or even like, for example, you mentioned Monte Carlo. Not everyone might be familiar with how Monte Carlo works and things like that. Maybe provide more details. But I think that we should wrap up. Any final words, but not a question, Jose, not a new topic, just final words before we wrap up.
No, I think for on my side, on this topic, there's a lot of good books. I like Mike Kahn's book on Agile estimation and planning. I think it's called, or Agile. Yeah,
it's quite a notebook, isn't it? Like,
yeah, it is. It is, but very,
we need to go back to
yeah, very good. And there's also, I think, some talks or workshops that he's run online, so you can actually see how he teaches the material and all that stuff. And then there's another book which I recommend a lot if you're more on the Kanban side of things, and no estimates and that kind of stuff, because you still need to answer certain questions. Which is Daniel Baganti's book, Actionable Agile Metrics, I think it's called, which is also a good book to look at. And it goes into some of the things that we discussed here at the end. So yeah, very much recommended those two. I think it covers quite well estimation and planning on the Agile side of things.
Cool. Mash?
I haven't read the Actionable Agile Metrics, so thank you for the book recommendation. I think estimates is an extremely important tool, and I personally think that it's, regardless of what we feel about estimates, we should understand the theory, the rationale, and the techniques behind them, right? That's my kind of take out of here as well, is that we need to know a lot more about estimates, and they exist whether we like them or not, and it's important that we do them right and we have the right relationship with them.
Yeah, so, and from my side, I'm a bit more aligned to what you said, Mash. I'll go a little bit further and I'll play the professionalism card, right? So I think that anyone providing a service should, as a professional, also mitigate the needs of your client. It doesn't matter if you're a permanent employee, if you're a contractor, a consultant, it doesn't matter. You as a software developer, you are providing a service, and the people paying for the service, they have needs. And those needs are directly related to the things that you produce. So you need to help them to satisfy those needs. Of course, we all understand all the caveats, or the dangers of providing estimates and how they might be interpreted, and the challenges in providing good estimates. But I think that the fact of you providing a service, you should provide an idea of how long it's going to take for you to do your job, given all the caveats that we already discussed. But I think that I'm on the camp. I don't like the idea of no estimate or screw the client. I think that as a provider, I would work with my client to make sure that whatever I produce is within the expectations that they have. So, right, I'm gonna finish with that one. So if you're new to this channel, or if you like this chat, please remember to subscribe to the channel so then you are notified when we have a new video. And also, yeah, exactly. And if you like this video, just put the thumbs up in there and leave in the comments if there are any other topics that you would like us to discuss.
Agree, disagree. Yeah,
exactly. So leave your comments. Like, yeah, it would be great to know what you think about estimates and the experiences that you had as well. So we might take those ideas to the next, let's say maybe part 2 of this one. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.